Hi, guys. We're getting really close to the end of Luke. This week, we are going from Luke chapter 19, which hopefully at this point, if you're watching this, you've already had our in-class discussion about Luke 19, and we're going to make it all the way to Luke 24. So we're going to be doing some double chapter worksheets here, but I think it'll be really good. And I really enjoy the book of Luke. It's got a lot of interesting details that help us understand the rest of the Synoptic Gospels. And of course, we'll be changing it up big time once we're done with Luke, because we'll be in the book of John, which is very different from the rest of the Gospels. So I'm interested to get into that with you guys and talk about that. So let's talk about Luke chapter 20. If you'll look at that as I read it, go ahead and follow along, and then we'll talk through what's going on in Luke chapter 20, what Jesus is doing, what Jesus is teaching, and see what's going on. All right, and this is what it says. Now it happened on one of those days, as he, this being Jesus, taught the people in the temple and preached the gospel, that the chief priests and the scribes, together with the elders, confronted him and spoke to him, saying, "Tell us, by what authority are you doing these things? Or who is he who gave you this authority?" But he answered and said to them, "I will ask you one thing, and answer me. The baptism of John, was it from heaven or from men?" And they reasoned among themselves, saying, "If we say from heaven, he will say, why then did you not believe him? But if we say from men, all the people will stone us, for they are persuaded that John was a prophet." So they answered that they did not know where it was from. And Jesus said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things." Then he began to tell the people this parable. A certain man planted a vineyard, leased it to vine dressers, and went into a far country for a long time. Now at vintage time he sent a servant to the vine dressers that they might give him some of the fruit of the vineyard. But the vine dressers beat him and sent him away empty-handed. Again he sent another servant, and they beat him also, and treated him shamefully, and sent him away empty-handed. And again he sent a third, and they wounded him also, and cast him out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. Probably they will respect him when they see him." But when the vine dressers saw him, they reasoned among themselves, saying, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, that the inheritance may be ours." So they cast him out of the vineyard and killed him. Therefore, what will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy those vine dressers and give the vineyard to others. When they heard it, they said, "Certainly not." Then he looked at them and said, "What then is this that is written? The stone which the builder rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Whoever falls on that stone will be broken, but on whomever it falls, it will grind him to powder." And the chief priests and the scribes that very hour sought to lay hands on him, but they feared the people, for they knew he had spoken this parable against them. So they watched him and sent spies who pretended to be righteous, that they might seize on his words in order to deliver him to the power and the authority of the governor. Then they asked him, saying, "Teacher, we know that you say and teach rightly, and you do not show personal favoritism, but teach the way of God in truth." Big sarcasm here. Is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? But he perceived their craftiness and said to them, "Why do you test me? Show me a denarius. Whose image and inscription does it have?" They answered and said, "Caesar's." And he said to them, "Render therefore to Caesar's the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." But they could not catch him in his words in the presence of the people, and they marveled at his answer and kept silent. Then some of the Sadducees, who deny that there is resurrection, came to him and asked him, saying, "Teacher, Moses wrote to us that if a man's brothers die, having a wife, and he dies without children, his brother should take his wife and raise up offspring for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers, and the first took a wife and died without children. And the second took her wife as wife, and he died childless. And the third took her, and in like manner the 7 also, and they left no children and died. Last of all, the woman died. Therefore, in the resurrection, whose wife does she become? For all 7 had her as wife." Jesus answered and said to them, "The sons of this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are counted worthy to attain that age and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage, nor can they die any more, for they are equal to the angels and are sons of God, being sons of the righteous, resurrection. But even Moses showed in the burning bush passage that the dead are raised when he called the Lord the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. For he is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for all live to him. Then some of the scribes answered and said, Teacher, you have spoken well. But after that they dared not question him any more. And he said to them, How can you say that the Christ is the son of David? Now David himself said in the book of Psalms, The Lord said to my Lord, Sit at my right hand, till I make your enemies your footstool. Therefore David calls him Lord. How is he then his son? Then, in the hearing of all the people, he said to his disciples, Beware the scribes who desire to go around in long robes, love greetings in the marketplace, best seats in the synagogues, and best place at the feasts, who devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. These will receive greater condemnation. All right, so that was a fairly long passage. Hopefully you stayed with it the entire time because I really like this passage. What's going on here is the Pharisees are questioning Jesus. Jesus has arrived in Jerusalem, and the Pharisees are putting forward their attempt to get rid of Jesus. Right? He was a problem in the past, but he's been making bolder and bolder claims, and he's been making people actually want to serve God and not listen to the religious leaders, and that is a problem. He's stirring people up. He's perhaps threatening the Sadducees' cushy position in the Roman government. They can't have that. They like their cushy jobs. They're going to need to get rid of Jesus. So that's what this chapter is kind of introducing. And I really like this chapter because the Pharisees and the Sadducees are trying to be super sneaky, and Jesus totally avoids their question and sticks it to them. He makes fun of them and what they're asking, and he dodges everything really, really well. This is one of those areas where we really see Jesus's skill at speaking. He takes something the Pharisees say and he twists it around and he gets them back with it. They thought they had him tricked and they were going to get rid of him, but he turns it on them. And I imagine it just makes them even more angry, right? It's like everything they're doing to stop this guy makes them angrier. Maybe to use an Evan Baker basketball illustration, it's like the guy that's really good on the court. He's handling the ball really well. He fakes you out. He makes you fall on your face. And everything you try and do, he just beats you, and it makes you more and more mad. It's kind of what Jesus is doing here with this dialogue that he's having with the Pharisees. So let's go ahead and start off with what Jesus starts off with. He receives a question from the Pharisees, and they're asking him, by what authority are you doing these things? Okay, these healings, these miracles, and why are they asking this? This is not a nice question. This isn't because the Pharisees are like, oh, maybe this is the Messiah. No, this is a question that is intended to trick Jesus, or trap Jesus. Maybe we should say it that way. Because, of course, what's the anticipated answer? Based on everything we know about Jesus, the anticipated answer is, I'm doing these things by the power of my Father, God. Okay? And the Pharisees are immediately going to yell out, blasphemy, and they're going to take Jesus and they're going to deal with him. That's the plan. That's what they're hoping Jesus is going to do. But Jesus twists this on him, and he says, look, I'm doing this by the authority by which John was baptizing people. And now he's flipped the equation on them. Okay, they're in trouble now because they have two options. If they say, oh, well, it's of God, then they just agreed with him and they made Jesus look good. Okay, that's bad. They can't do that. Okay, they hate Jesus. But if they say no, then not only do they insult Jesus, not only do they drag Jesus down, but they're also dragging John the Baptist. And this huge crowd loves John the Baptist. They got themselves baptized. They've repented. They wanted to follow the message of John. John's hugely popular. He's just been killed by one of Herod's sons just a few months ago. And so to agree that John was not a disciple or was not of God would make the people hate them. Might even lead to violence, maybe a mob uprising against them. So they say, well, we don't know. We don't know where he was from. In other words, we don't know where you're from, Jesus. And Jesus, responds, then neither will I tell you. Because they were trying to trick him. He returned the favor and they just ended up looking dumb. At least that's how I think the situation played out. We then have Jesus giving a parable of these vine dressers, which is very clearly right? Jesus doesn't actually explain this parable, but we very clearly understand that this is a reference to the recent history of the nation of Israel. The servants of the vine dresser are prophets sent by God announcing the plan, the salvation plan that God has. And every time they arrive, the wicked of Israel kill them for their message. And we can even assume that the final servant could have been John the Baptist. Doesn't have to be. Again, this parable is not explained to us explicitly, but even the last parable has been killed by the wicked people because they don't believe his message. And finally, Jesus says the owner of the vineyard sends his son. That's obviously Jesus. And they think, we will get rid of the message and we'll get it our way if we kill him. Right? And that's exactly what the Pharisees are going to do. We don't like the fact that Jesus is saying that we actually need to love God and love our neighbors. We want God to show up, throw some thunderbolts on the Romans, kind of like Zeus was supposed to do, blow some Romans up, knock their heads together, install us as the new lords of the earth, and we don't want to change anything about what we're doing. Right? That's what the Pharisees want, and the Sadducees, and the scribes, and the Jewish religious leaders, right? Poor Pharisees. They're always getting the bad rap. It's all of them. They're all bad. That's what they want. And yet Jesus says that's not what's going to happen. Okay? And when you kill the son, there's wrath that's going to be poured out upon you personally. And in general, if you reject the son, what happens? Eternal punishment. An eternity away from Jesus. And you notice that when they hear this, they actually yell out, "Certainly not." Okay? They're like, "No, you're wrong. You're not the son." Okay? Because think about it. Read through verse 15. So they cast him out of the vineyard and killed him. Therefore, what will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy those vine dressers and give the vineyard to others. And they're saying, "Certainly not." No, that's not what he's going to do. Okay, they're contradicting Jesus to his face. That's pretty bold to contradict the God of the universe. Say, no, that's not how it's going to happen. I think we can safely assume that they're wrong in that. God's obviously going to fix that. And then Jesus goes on to quote scripture to them to prove them. And it says then in verse 19, from that very hour, they were like, we're going to get him. We're gonna trick him. We're gonna haul him before the Romans. We're gonna get rid of Jesus. And obviously, the next few chapters are their plans to get rid of Jesus. So first, the Pharisees think they're going to be tricky, and they're going to come and they're going to trick Jesus into either supporting Rome, which would lose him all of his friends, and then they can grab him, or he's going to not support Rome, in which case they can turn him into the Romans, and the Romans can deal with the problem. So they go and they ask Jesus, is it right for us to pay taxes? This is a pretty loaded question. Because if Jesus says, yes, you should pay taxes, they can then accuse him of loving the Romans. But if Jesus says, no, don't pay your taxes, then he is attacking the Romans and they can turn him in, right? So tricky situation. But Jesus flips this on him. He says, look at the coins. They've got Caesar's face on them. Give to Caesar that which is Caesar's. Now, there's some imagery here that Jesus doesn't explain, but we know. What has the image of God? If the coin has the image of Caesar, what has the image of God? The correct answer is us, or in this context, the people. Okay? So if you have to give coins to Caesar, you have to give yourself, people, to God. And of course, who's the representative of God in this situation? It's Jesus. So basically what Jesus says is, no, give your coins to Caesar and give yourself to God, right? Which is Jesus' entire message. It's the gospel. Tricky. He gets them with the gospel. Then the Sadducees show up, and we're not even going to dig into this really silly example that they give. First off, Luke very helpfully tells us that the Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection. Okay? Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection. What immediately follows this is a question about the resurrection. What does this tell us? The Sadducees are totally being fake. Okay? So it's like somebody saying, hey, I believe in flat earth. So if the world is round, can you explain why blah, 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 right? They've already established they don't believe this, and yet they're asking questions about the very thing that they don't believe in. So we can tell that this is a trick immediately, right? Why would they ask about the resurrection? They don't even believe the resurrection exists, but they're asking it to trick Jesus. Now, what are they trying to trick Jesus into here? I think, as far as I can tell, they're just trying to trick him into making a mistake or claiming something that they can jump on and say, see, this is your problem, your theology is bad, and maybe people leave him here. There's no clear way to execute Jesus for answering this question wrong. So I'm not sure exactly what the point was, but they ask him this complicated question. To simplify it from the King James language, there was a guy who married a woman, and he died before they had children. Now, Old Testament law said the brother of the man, if he is unmarried, needs to marry the wife, and the first male child that they have is legally considered the child of his brother who died. And the rest of the children are his and his wife's children. And so each one of these guys progressively gets married to the woman, dies, 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 7 times, right? So 7 brothers marry the same woman, they all die. Leads me to a question. Is this woman poisoning them? Is she stabbing them with a knife? No, that's not the right question. But the point is, they all die, then the woman dies. Okay. In the resurrection, the Sadducees ask, whose wife is she? She's been married to 7 dudes, 7 brothers, no children. Whose wife is she? And Jesus really answers in an interesting way. And by the way, this is one of the things, at least for myself, that I don't understand what Jesus means by this. He says that people in the resurrection will not be married or given in marriage. I don't know what that means. Does that mean that there is no marriage anymore? Does that mean that your mom and dad aren't married in heaven? Maybe. I don't know. I don't have enough context to really understand what Jesus is talking about, but he kind of changes it. Not only does he not fall for their trap, but he goes and he points out that, look, the resurrection is true, and the reason it's true is the very name of God. Look at what he says. What does Moses call the Lord? He calls him the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. All 3 of those guys were dead when Moses said those words. And yet, Jesus is saying, look, God's not the God of the dead. If he's the God of Abraham, it's because Abraham is alive. Okay? Not physically, not in his old body. Abraham's body was dead. But his spirit, his soul was alive and either had a new resurrected body or will have a resurrected body. Again, this isn't an end times theology class, so we won't get into that. But God is the God of the living. Abraham is alive in his God, as is Isaac, as is Jacob, as will we. Okay? By the way, this was apparently a pretty convincing answer because we see that some of the scribes say, "Teacher, you have spoken well." I think this is a non-sarcastic. So some of the Pharisees and the Sadducees are like, hey, wow, this guy's actually on his stuff. He knows what he's talking about, right? Think about Nicodemus. Nicodemus, I think, has probably already made up his mind about who Jesus is, that he is the Messiah by this point. But maybe there's other Pharisees that are thinking about this. Jesus then goes in the 2 last things, and with this we'll sign off. Number 1, he talks about how David had prophesied that the Messiah would be his Lord. Because the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes had this idea that the Messiah would be a descendant of David and therefore subordinate to David, right? That's this concept that's very common in world culture, especially in Asia, that the older generation is always superior to the younger generation. But what Jesus is saying, look, that's true. But if David is calling the Messiah his Lord, that means that the Messiah must be something above a person. In fact, he's super above a person. He's God, right? And that's why he's Lord. He's Lord even to David. So he's not underneath David like this. He's actually way up here, right? He is Lord. That's Jesus' point. Finally, Jesus says, beware of the scribes. Poor scribes. Jesus means all of them. Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, lawyers. These are the people whose job it was to read through the Old Testament and teach the truth. And this is a condemnation of that. They're falsely teaching. They're more concerned with their own power than they are having a relationship with God. And ultimately, we see that all throughout their behavior in the entire book. Now, this has kind of been a bit of a downer passage, and unfortunately, the next 2 chapters are just the same. We're going towards the crucifixion, Jesus' death. But the exciting thing is that Jesus doesn't stay dead. He raises himself. He rises again with his own power after 3 days in the grave. Because of that, we can have a relation. And just like what Moses said, he is our God. And He will continue to be our God after our physical bodies fail and we are resurrected with him. And that is awesome and encouraging. Hope you guys have a great week. Please really spend some time thinking and meditating about the end of Luke. I think you'll really enjoy it if you take the time to think about it and to let it change you.